Hi, I am Doris Quiñones,
I'm Caitlin Kime.
I'm Jessica Lira.
Mylene Solis.
and this is ASCI 67. Should all food animal products be free range pasture raised?
Today we'll be talking about free-range animal products and their pros and cons.
So domestication of animals for food began around 10,000 years ago. During the Neolithic Revolution, early farming systems were by default free range or pasture based, as there was no infrastructure for intensive confinement. Domestication. Sheep, goats, cattle, and pigs were among the first domesticated animals. They grazed on open land and played a role in early mixed farming systems. Pasture-based systems. Traditional livestock farming relied on rotational grazing and free welfare and soil health practices. The rise of industrial agriculture began in the 20th century and saw a dramatic shift in food production with the advent of industrial agriculture, particularly after World War II. So, confined animal feeding operations like CAFOs became the norm of industrialized nations to maximize output and minimize cost. So, these systems prioritize efficiency but raised ethical, like health and environmental concerns. For example, antibiotics, growth hormones, and grain-based diets became widespread to accelerate growth and prevent disease in crowded conditions. As we see on the pictures on the right, the conditions of pigs and chickens, they were just overcrowded and just very inhumane way. So the emergence of free range and pasture raised movement. As consumer awareness of food systems grew in the late 20th century and 21st, interest surged in animal welfare, sustainability, and transparency. Free range and pasture raised systems promote natural behaviors, outdoor access, and grazing. So grass fed and organic labels became popular. Although definitions and standards vary by countries, advocates argued these methods are better for animal welfare, nutrient density, soil health, and climate resilience.
Some pros for free range and pasture range products is that they are generally healthier meat and healthier dairy because they have more omega-3s, conjugated lanthanolic acid, and vitamins. These animals are also given fewer antibiotics because they're held in less confined spaces, so the likelihood of illness to spread is a lot lower. There's also the environmental ren regenerations, which helps because the rotating of the grazing improves soil health and carbon emissions, also lower disease outbreak risks because of the less transmission due to open air and lower density in the barns. Another advantage is the reduced greenhouse gas emission, which is especially important when looking at cattle as they emit methane. Another advantage is the reduced levels of stress in animal and suffering because they are held in less crowded environments and in more humane conditions. Another advantage is that by buying pasture and free range animals, you can help support local economy because a lot of small scale farms often rely on pasture-based methods. This also increases the biodiversity as pasture systems promote wildlife and plant diversity. This also helps consumers make a more ethical choice, as it aligns with a lot of values for humane and ethical consumption and treatment of the animals. This also helps to preserve traditional farming practices because it keeps the heritage methods alive in agriculture. There's also a reduced use of chemical inputs, less reliance on synthetic feeds and fertilization, and there is a growing consumer demand as the trends in our society reflect wanting more sustainable and responsible consumption. Another advantage is the ethical aspect of this. Animal welfare. Improved living conditions, free-range and pasture-raised animals generally have more space and access to the outdoors and more natural life compared to those in a factory farm. There's also the ethical benefits, which can be seen as a step towards reducing animal suffering, aligning with the ethical practices of minimizing harm. There is still criticism. Despite the better conditions, animals are still bred and controlled and eventually killed, raising concerns about whether improving welfare justifies the exploitation of animals. A lot of animal rights is debated, whether the moral status of animals. Some ethical theories argue that animals have essential value and should not be used as means to end. This continues to be questioned even in humane systems. Animals are still being commercialized, which many argue is morally wrong regardless of the treatment of the animal. Another issue is the honest and transparency in these companies. Labeling ethics, terms like free range can be vague and misleading, making it hard for consumers to make an informed and ethical choice. Deceptive marketing is another big issue. The systems labeling are ethical still involve significant suffering, so consumers can be unknowingly contributing to unethical practices. Some ethical aspects. The environmental ethics is another big issue. Sustainability. While plant-based systems can be better for biodiversity and soil health, they may also use more land and emit more greenhouse gases per food unit. Ethical balance. There's a tension between the ethical treatment of animals and ethical responsibility to reduce environmental harm, especially in the context of climate change. Justice and equality. Access to ethical food. Ethical food products are often more expensive, raising issues for fairness. Only wealthier individuals can afford to eat ethically. Cultural and social and economic considerations. Ethical decisions around animal use may be also accounted to diverse values, traditions, and economic realities. Humane responsibility. Stewardship versus domination versus ethical frameworks often ask whether humans can be responsibly caring for animals or whether the use of them is the abuse of power. Alternative choices. An alternative choice people tend to go with is a plant-based diet, as this is a less harmful option and you can choose that one available. Cultural and sociological. Cultural traditions and identities. Deep-rooted practices. In many cultures, raising and consuming animals is tied to the heritage, religion, and traditional livelihoods. Ethical practices and humane practices. Free-range or pasture-based systems often align with traditional values of respect and responsibility towards animals, reinforcing cultural identities. Sociological rules for farming communities. Support for small-scale farmers. Pasture-based systems are often in local or family-run farms, which can advance rural economy, and preserve traditional farm knowledge. There's also the community trust and transparency that is built, as local free-range farms are often fostering closer relationships between producers and consumers, which can help build capital and trust in the food system.
Again, with cultural and sociological, there are public perception and social norms that are involved. Ethical consumerism, the rise of free-range and pasture-raised products reflects a broader societal shift towards more ethical, conscious consumption. Social signaling. Choosing these products can be a form of moral or cultural expression. People may identify as ethical omnivores or locavores as a part of their social identity. This is a huge reason when picking what foods they want to eat and deciding who they are to everyone else. Critique in industrial agriculture. Support of pasture-raised systems often comes with a rejection of factory farming, reflecting changing societal values about animals and food ethics. Inequality in access. Class-based access to ethics. Sociological, only certain groups, often wealthier or more educated, can afford or prioritize free-range options, which can deepen divides in ethical food access. So it's not accessible for everybody, and it's hard to get what is needed. Globalization and cultural shifts. Western influence. The free-range and pasture-raised movement has been largely shaped by Western animal welfare ideals, which may not align with all cultural perspectives. And on the right, we see different pictures depicting the cage-free, free-range, or certified humane, and the differences in what to expect. Some current events, implementation of California's Proposition 12. As of January 1st, 2024, California and Massachusetts have fully enforced laws requiring that fresh pork sold within their borders must come from gestation crate-free systems. This mandates that pigs have sufficient space to move freely, addressing concerns over animal confinement. Producers like Neiman Ranch have aligned with these standards, ensuring that pork products meet the new humane requirements. Again, in a significant move toward transparency, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, also known as USDA, updated its labeling guidelines to define pasture-raised more precisely. Now animals labeled as such must spend the majority of their lives on pasture land with root vegetation cover, distinguishing it from free range, which only requires outdoor access. This change, driven by a petition from Pasture Bird and Purdue Farms, aims to prevent misleading claims and helps consumers make informed choices. To the right, you can see the labels to help people decide which are the right choices. Again, with current events, pasture-raised eggs gain traction in the U.S. Family farms such as Pace Valley View Farm in Missouri are finding a success in pasture-raised egg production through partnerships with companies like Vital Farms, with hens loaded 109 or 108 square feet each. These operations prioritize animal welfare and transparency. Consumers can trace their eggs back to the farm via online tools, reflecting a growing demand for ethically produced foods. Vital Farms, a leading producer of pasture-raised eggs, continues to grow its network of family farms, surpassing 425 in 2024. The company emphasizes ethical farming practices and transparency, offering consumerism traceability of their eggs back to the farm. Despite challenges like the avian flu outbreaks, Vital Farms projects revenue growth of at least 22% in 2025, aiming for 1 billion sales by 2027. To the right, we can see the different sizes of space in square footage that makes the difference of pasture raised, free range, and cage free.
Explanations. Definitions and practices. Free range. Animals have some access to the outdoors, but standards vary widely. Pasture raised. Animals raised permanently outdoors on pasture, often with more space and diet closer to their natural one. Cage-free, especially in poultry. Chickens are not confined to cages but may still live indoors in crowded barns. Key points. Not all free-range or pasture-range systems are equally ethical. There's a spectrum of welfare standards. Ethical frameworks. Utilitarian, like, for example, Peter Singer, focuses on reducing suffering, supports humane farming over factory farming. Animal rights. Examples like Tom Reagan and Gary Frisson argue that using animals for any purpose is inherently unethical, regardless of how humanely they are treated. Vital ethics and stewardships. Empathize human responsibility to care for animals respectfully and not exploitatively. Key points. Ethical assessments differ depending on whether one values reduced suffering or rejects all use to animals. Environmental and social impacts. Environmental benefits of pasture systems may include regenerative grazing, carbon sequestration, reduce use of synthetic inputs like fertilizers or antibiotics. The drawbacks are higher use of land and potential methane emissions, especially in cattle. Social dimensions. Small farms may be ethical but less scalable. Ethical foods tend to be more expensive, raising inequality concerns. Key points. Ethical food systems may consider the balance between animals' welfare, environmental sustainability, and social justice. Policy and label standards. In the US, USDA certified labels like organic, grass-fed, or free range. Put enforcement can be inconsistent. California's Proposition 12 sets minimum space requirements for livestock. An example is ethical regulation. Globally, in the EU generally has stronger welfare laws. Some countries like Switzerland ban certain factory farming practices altogether. Key points. Policy shapes the ethical landscape. Knowledge of labeling and law is to key informed choices. Informed opinion slash summary. Free range and pasture raised systems are a step forward in improving animal welfare compared to factory farming, allowing animals to have more of a natural lives. However, ethical concerns remain about using animals at all, especially when humane treatment ends in slaughters. These systems can also be environmentally and economically challenging, while better than industrial methods. They don't fully solve the deeper, more questions about animals' use in our food systems.
And these are the references and resources we chose to use for these slides. Thank you.